Today, we're digging into the real cost of UK immigration fees, looking back over the last 2 decades to see how things have really changed. Over the last 20 years, UK visa fees have changed significantly. But how much of that change was inflation and how much was real growth? Using official UK Home Office and ONS data, this analysis breaks down the numbers from 2006 to 2026, comparing immigration costs to wages, inflation, and housing. And I want to be really clear right from the start. This isn't commentary. What we're doing here is structured economic measurement, and it's all based on publicly available data. Okay, so before we jump into the numbers, let's make sure we're all on the same page. We're going to quickly cover some core definitions we'll be using throughout this analysis. So probably the most important idea to get our heads around is this: real term price. Now, this isn't just the number you see on a government website. It's the price after we've adjusted for inflation. Why does that matter? Well, it lets us see if the cost has actually gone up more than just the general rise in prices for everything else. It's how we measure the real financial hit over time. And to make sure this whole analysis is solid, we're only using official sources. The fee data, that comes straight from the UK Home Office's own regulations. Inflation and wage data, that's from the Office for National Statistics, or ONS. And we're looking at a pretty big window here, a full 20 years from 2006 to 2026, which should give us a really clear long-term view. All right, with that foundation set, let's actually look at how these fees have changed. What the data shows is a really clear shift in policy over the last 20 years. We've seen fees go from something that just covered the cost of processing to something that's now a pretty big source of government revenue. Let's take a look at this timeline for the indefinite leave to remain fee. You might know it as settlement. It's a big one because it's the right to live, work, and study in the UK without any time limits. So back in 2007, that fee was £750. By 2013, it had already jumped past the £1,000 mark. But wow, look at 2018. It more than doubled. And that trend didn't stop, with another 20% hike announced in 2023. So what was the reason for that last big jump? Well, the official line gives us some important context. The source material says that the 2023 increases were part of a direct policy decision to use that money to help fund public sector pay raises. This really draws a clear line between what migrants are charged and the UK's broader government spending. Okay, but numbers on a page are one thing. The really crucial question is, what does all this mean in the real world? How do these fee increases compare to what people in the UK were actually earning? That's the only way to really measure affordability. This next part is really where it gets interesting. We're going to translate that abstract cost into something much more concrete: time. We're looking at how many weeks of work it would take someone on the average UK wage to pay for that settlement application. And as you can see, the trend is, well, it's pretty clear. If we go back to 2007, you'd need to work for just under a week and a half at the average wage, remember, to cover that settlement fee. Now, fast forward to 2026. Even when you account for wages going up, that same application is projected to take over 4 weeks of work. That's basically a whole month's salary for the average person. So the real term burden, it's gone up by nearly 3 times. And here's a really critical point. What we've been talking about so far is just the application fee itself. The total cost is actually a lot higher. Once you add in the mandatory immigration health surcharge, that's the fee migrants pay to use the NHS, the data shows the total capital cost just skyrockets. It goes from about 2 weeks of work back in 2007 to more than 20 weeks of work by 2026. A huge difference. Okay, let's zoom out a little and look at the bigger economic picture here, because these fee increases didn't just happen in a bubble. They happened right alongside some major shifts in the UK's cost of living, which, as you can imagine, really piles on the pressure. For most of the 2010s, inflation was pretty steady, hovering around 2%. But then the 2020s hit, and things got really volatile. We saw a peak of over 9% in 2022, which drove the prices of essentials, housing, energy, to historic highs. And even though inflation has come down a bit since then, the actual cost of living is still way higher than it was, which puts a huge squeeze on any spare cash people might have. To really bring this home and see how all these costs add up over time, let's look at a real-world scenario. We'll follow a hypothetical family, a skilled worker who comes to the UK with their partner and 2 kids. So, the path to becoming a British citizen isn't just one step, it's a whole journey, and the fees just keep stacking up. Using the 2026 figures, that first visa plus the health surcharge for the whole family is almost £14,000 right out of the gate. Then the extension adds nearly another 10,000. Getting settlement for all four of them, that's another 12,000. And finally, naturalization costs over 6,000 more. So, when you add all of that together, the grand total for this family to become British citizens is a staggering £42,298. And to put that number into perspective, for a lot of people, that's a cost that rivals the down payment on a house. It's just a huge amount of money, and it can seriously get in the way of a family's ability to save, invest, or just build a future. Okay, so we've looked at a lot of data. What are the key takeaways from this whole 20-year analysis? What's the bottom line? Okay, here are the key findings. First, it's crystal clear that the growth in UK immigration fees has blown past both inflation and average wage growth. Second, the actual burden on an applicant, when you measure it in weeks of work, has nearly tripled for a settlement application. Third, that immigration health surcharge we talked about, it's been a total game changer, massively inflating the upfront cost. And finally, the data really points to a clear strategic shift. These fees aren't just about covering administrative costs anymore. They've become a serious source of revenue for the government. This has been Migration Cost Index, structured, data-driven analysis of migration costs in the United Kingdom. All figures are based on publicly available data and presented without commentary. For continued economic measurement of UK immigration costs, refer to the next report.